Well, this is Simple Politics. My guest is my friend, Elie Honig, who is a former federal prosecutor, lawyer, CNN legal analyst, and now we can add to your resume, book author. Hatchet Man is his new book. Congratulations on the new book with our fellow publisher, HarperCollins. They're terrific over there.
Yeah, thank you. It was. I'm glad to take questions from the viewers about the process of writing a book. I think a lot of people are interested in it, have thought about doing it. And Kim, you've written several great books, but for a rookie author like me, it was really a remarkable experience. It was fun, rewarding, exhilarating, difficult, exhausting, stressful, ultimately rewarding. However,
well, and I must say, I know a lot of what's in this book from covering it. And it was a great read. And I'm not just saying that. It was really interesting. What I liked about it, Elie, is as an educator, law professor, not only does it talk about what happened in the Barr Justice Department, but it explains what is the Justice Department and what is the role of prosecutors. So it does a lot in terms of basic civic education. So I want to just start by asking you what you mean by the prosecutor's code, because you talk about that anecdotes all throughout the book.
Yeah.
And you do code provision by code provision. What is that?
So the prosecutor's code are those unwritten rules. Every profession, I think, has its unwritten rules, whether you're talking about baseball or media or law school, right? Things you do, things you just don't do. And I argue that as a prosecutor, we have plenty of written rules. We have statutes, we have the sentencing guidelines, we have the justice manual. But really what the most important ideas are things that you learn really only from doing the job, from being a line level courtroom prosecutor like I was, from sometimes getting your butt kicked, getting yelled at by judges, losing in court, making mistakes. That's the only real way you can learn this prosecutor's code. And what it does is it sort of ingrains in you these principles, these ideals of how to do the job the right way. And Bill Barr, one of my arguments, not the only one, by the way, some of the critics have made it like this is my own, I mean, this would be overly simplistic. It was my only argument. One of my arguments about why Bill Barr was so corrupt, so bad at his job is because the man never worked a day in his life as a line level prosecutor. He never stepped into a courtroom to try a case. He never worked at a U.S. attorney's office. He was AG twice, by the way, one of two people in our history who ever has done that. But he had a lack of appreciation for, or maybe knowledge of, the prosecutor's code. And that led him to do all sorts of things that are anathema to that code. Lying over and over, that's sort of rule one. Playing politics, I think that's rule 1A. Undercutting his own colleagues in public, not owning up when he was wrong. And I sort of go through each of those violations in the book.
Yeah, no, actually, that was my first question to you. Who cares that he hasn't been a prosecutor in the past? This is an appointed position. And you mention that he had and I'm quoting you, a complete authority standard for the Attorney General in terms of enforcing the criminal laws. And we saw this throughout the Trump administration, this idea that, listen, this is his presidency. He appointed these people under Article 2, his appointment power. He can remove them at will. That is his prerogative. So why not just put a non-prosecutor or his son or Rudy Giuliani or, whoever he wants in that role?
Yeah, I mean, you can pick whoever you want for this job. That doesn't mean that person is going to perform admirably. And I argue that Bill Barr was sort of initially handicapped by his lack of understanding of what it was really all about. And one line that I draw in the book, I argue for in the book, it's not written anywhere in our laws, is that DOJ needs to be separate from the presidency. I don't mean in all respects. There certainly are policy goals the president can pursue through DOJ. Like you say, the president certainly has the right to appoint or remove the AG. But when it comes to the criminal prosecutorial function, that's where DOJ needs to stand separate and apart. In my book, I'm a bit of a prosecutorial purist, and I take issue strongly with Bill Barr, who has said in his prior writings that he believes the president has full prosecutorial power. I don't believe that is the case. I don't believe that should be the case. And I think we saw the dangers of that kind of approach in this past administration, where Bill Barr, in a dishonest way, in a way that twisted the law, really took extreme measures to protect not just Donald Trump, but also those political allies of Donald Trump who got themselves in trouble, the Michael Flynn's, the Paul Manaforts, that kind of thing. So that's a line that I argue for in the book, that I was always raised to believe DOJ should respect, the line between politics and prosecution.
So when you, just so people understand, line prosecutors
Yeah.
gather evidence and then decide whether to actually bring a charge. That's classic Article 2 executive power. Somebody else passes the laws, prosecutors decide whether to actually enforce the laws. What you're talking about is, in making that decision, DOJ doesn't have a sort of a line to the president to say, are you okay with us prosecuting this person who may or may not be in your political orbit? That is, the president, just as a matter of norms, doesn't dictate who does and who does not get prosecuted. And why
Exactly.
is that? And why is that, Elie? I mean, this seems so fundamental, but I know you do a lot of educating the public. And
Yeah.
this is the stuff I think it's important to break down. Why do we not want presidents, even though technically the authority is in the Constitution, why, as a matter of precedent, as a matter of norms, DOJ doesn't do that, doesn't allow the president to call the shots?
Right. I think that separation should go both ways. DOJ shouldn't ever consult with the president, hey, how would you like us to handle this? Or the president shouldn't ever call over to DOJ or perhaps tweet out to the public, I'd like to see this person let off easy. I'd like to see this person pursued. Why is that? It's a great question, Kim. I think the answer is because we're protecting against abuse of power. Because if you get a president who is ruthless enough and lacks ethics enough, like Donald Trump, then you want DOJ there as a safeguard. And I'll give you an example from the book from Bill Barr. It's one of the things, look, I'm very critical of Bill Barr. I mean, the book's called Hatchet Man, but I do give him credit for some things he did. But look, for example, towards in the very end days, right before the election, when Donald Trump was essentially in desperation mode, and he was calling for the arrest and prosecution of Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and Jim Comey, right? Bill Barr did not follow through on those, in large part because even if he wanted to, he couldn't have. He had no evidence. But imagine if the president could just say it and it would be so, and we didn't have a DOJ, even a sort of servile AG like Bill Barr, who was able to say no or just at least ignore it. I mean, imagine if Donald Trump actually had the power to issue arrest warrants, to just call up the AG who would have to listen to him. That would be a very dangerous thing. So I think it's really a check on presidential power within the executive branch, which I understand is perhaps a little hard for a constitutional scholar like you to not understand, but I understand why it's an unusual or perhaps there's some tension in that argument.
Well, we hear this unitary executive theme thrown around, frankly, in a way that's, you're taking scholarship and naming things and bringing it into policy. I agree with you, just for the record, 100%. It's absolutely vital. And you also have a lot of experience in prosecuting mob bosses. So to me, that, I mean, and maybe you agree with me, that's not a bad analogy for what it would be like to have a president who had complete authority to, call the dogs on or off his political opponents. Do you agree?
Yeah. There's this idea out there, Kim, which you referenced, called the unitary theory. And it's not a outside the bounds of sort of mainstream legal thought. It's a fairly popular view in conservative circles, Federalist Society circles, that holds that essentially the executive branch is superior to the other branches. And the executive branch, not just the president is the most powerful person in the executive branch, but the president is the executive branch. The executive is the president. Now, Bill Barr has long been a Federalist Society contributor. He was even listed as a contributor during his time as AG. However, Bill Barr took that idea of executive theory to an absolutely absurd extreme, where if Bill Barr had his way, the president could never be, forget about charged while in office, subpoenaed, investigated, questioned, really held to account, sued civilly in many respects. So really, if Bill Barr had his way, the president would truly be above the law. And by the way, Bill Barr had a really bad record in the courts. I mean, I didn't do this in the book, but I'm sort of tempted to go back and count up his one-loss record, like a basketball team or something. But he had a terrible record because his legal arguments are really flimsy. And I mean, both those that he made in court, some of those put forth by OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, which is supposed to be these geniuses who consult with DOJ, but they contorted themselves into some bizarre, ridiculous positions to accommodate Barr and in turn Donald Trump.
So I want to ask you about that, in that you talk about how Mueller, in the Mueller report, didn't really make a definitive decision, yes or no, whether he could be prosecuted in theory for obstruction of justice. You talk about how your former colleague, boss Preet Bharara, if he had been still in the Southern District, things would have been really different. Berman was ultimately fired, but arguably things didn't heat up out of the Southern District as somebody might expect. You also mentioned that if Matthew Whitaker, the interim AG, had been AG when you were in the office, that, quote, could have been a full-on revolt because he was so unqualified. So my question to you, Elie, and I know that you weren't inside DOJ during this, what do you think happened to the people below Bill Barr, the line prosecutors, the people you and I respect, who really are public servants, and people don't understand this, these people take their oath very, very, very seriously. What do you think happened with others not stepping up to, enforce the law?
It's a great question. And by the way, I've seen some of the comments. I will happily take viewer comments or questions actually later on in this. It's an interesting thing being what I'm a prosecutor like I was, someone in the U.S. Attorney's Office is making cases. To a large extent, you don't really know or care much who the Attorney General is. And I say that as a compliment. I worked 4 years, as it turned out, almost exactly 4 years and change under the Bush administration and 4 years and change under the Obama administration. So Republican AGs were Ashcroft, Gonzalez, Mukasey, and then Holder. I joke with Preet, I don't even remember the day you came into the SDNY. I kind of don't, because all you're doing as a line prosecutor is focusing on your cases. You keep your head down, you make your cases, you do the work. What happens in the AG's office is a million miles away. Big if here, if the AG is at least upholding the core principles, being honest and not at least overtly playing politics with the prosecutorial function. I didn't love all the AGs I served under. I didn't think they were all wonderful. I didn't agree with all their policy preferences, but I never questioned their credibility and whether they were overtly playing politics with our prosecutions. I think that changed under Bill Barr. Look, the vast majority of people kept their heads down and did their work, but I can't tell you how many people I've heard from, people on the line who were disgusted by what Bill Barr was doing and the failure of his top lieutenants, who also, by the way, had no prosecutorial experience, to check him in any way. And I'll tell you, I don't want to say too much here, but there's a prosecutor who I refer to in the book as part of a group who I don't know. I never met him. And he DM'd me or, LinkedIn messaged me, like we don't know each other, but he found me on LinkedIn and basically said, I want to thank you for writing this book because you really captured it so well. And it was agonizing living through this era and having to watch what Bill Barr was doing to DOJ. And I've heard that from plenty of other people who work there and alums. That's been part of the best part, is hearing from people who are 30-year alums, 40-year alums who said this book needed to be written so badly to set the record straight.
So let's walk through some of the politics, where he, it's the independence, the appearance of independence and the actual independence, as well as the outside appearance of independence. You talk about the infamous audition memo and then the 4-page letter that basically gutted, in my opinion, the entire Mueller investigation by summarizing in a misleading way and then withholding the full thing so that the press had moved on. Could you talk about those two missives and how critical that was?
Yeah, so the audition memo. This is a memo that Bill Barr wrote on his own, unsolicited. Nobody asked him, when he was a private citizen about 6 months before he became AG. It was very obvious at that point the AG's job was going to be open, because by this point, Trump was openly berating Jeff Sessions, and he didn't even wait until the midterm voting was over to get rid of Jeff Sessions. Bill Barr writes this memo in which he concludes that Robert Mueller's investigation was, and I quote, fatally misconceived. That's what Bill Barr said. Fatally misconceived.
Before
yes.
he was in office.
Before he becomes
as a private citizen. Right.
Exactly. Bill Barr tries, during his confirmation hearing, he's of course asked about this, and he tries to play it off like, oh, this was just my penny for your thoughts, views. It was just something on my mind, and I just thought they could benefit from my wisdom. Yeah, sure. And shockingly, that memo, we learned from Jonathan Swan later reported from Axios, a great reporter, that memo made its way to Donald Trump, whose eyes lit up. That's exactly what he's looking for, right? The biggest concern Donald Trump had at that moment, the Mueller investigation, I got a guy here who's done the job, he's known and respected, saying, I'm going to kill this thing. And then Bill Barr gets into office and by the way, continues this whole thing of like, oh, I just wrote it for no reason. By the way, he's also doing media. So his claim that he was just a concerned citizen, not trying to catch the president's ear, why do media? Meanwhile, he gets the job. He's the first person to get the Mueller report, essentially, outside of the Mueller team. And it takes him 2 days. He spends 2 days with this 448-page single-space report, thousands upon thousands of citations and facts. And he issues this 4-page letter, which is a completely dishonest document. And don't take my word for it. Robert Mueller wrote a letter saying to Bill Barr, essentially, you distorted my findings. And later, federal judges, multiple federal judges, found that Bill Barr distorted Mueller's findings. Let me lay out how, though, because people have heard this. On part one, interference from Russia, Bill Barr has this part where he quotes the Mueller report, but it's clearly the back end of the sentence because he puts the brackets around a lowercase t, which, like, people, you see that, that means he cut it off in the middle sentence. So he gives us the back half of the sentence, which says, Mueller found that, quote, lower bracket, there was no evidence sufficient to support a federal conspiracy crime. And I will give myself credit. I tweeted when I saw that, I said, how much you want to bet the first half of that sentence that he cut off begins with the word although. Nobody had seen the report. 4 weeks later, by the way, let's remember, Bill Barr held that report back, the actual report, for 27 days, during which his 4-page letter sort of just took over. When we got the letter, it turns out he had cut off the first half of the sentence, which began, although, and what it essentially said was, although Russia committed crimes to interfere with the election and help Donald Trump win, and the Trump campaign knew about and expected to benefit from those crimes and tried to contact Russia many, many times, there's no crime. Very different story, right? If you leave out all the bad stuff and give us only the good stuff for Donald Trump, it's going to totally distort the way people look at it. Part two was Bill Barr just declared, and to this day, he's never justified this. He's never explained it. No obstruction of justice. Mueller laid out evidence of 10 or 11 potential instances of obstruction, but I find there's no obstruction. He's never been made to take into task for this. And some of this could just be his view that the president can do anything he wants within his constitutional imperative, but he can't order somebody to lie, to create a false document like he did with Don McGahn. So Bill Barr's just straight up wrong there, and I argue he was in the bag, and we knew it all along. And that 4-page letter is just a disgrace, and it's his original sin.
So what would a legitimate or ethical attorney general, in your view, have done under identical circumstances? What should America and the world have seen happen with the Mueller report?
Very easy, Paul. Exactly what Robert Mueller wrote to Barr afterwards and said, I gave you summaries, right? There's 2 big volumes, they're each 200-something pages. Each of them, you can see them now, they're public, has a 6 or 7-page summary that Mueller said, hey, Bill Barr, I know you're going to have to spend some time going through this and scrubbing it for classified information. Here are 2 summaries. They're ready to go out. I've already scrubbed them. There's nothing classified in there. There's nothing that's going to interfere. Just put them out. And when Barr didn't do that, but instead gave his own 4-pager, Mueller was furious. And if you talk to Andrew Weissman, who I'm sure you're friends with, who was on the team, he said they flipped out when he did that because it was so dishonest. And by the way, Barr did so many things that I think we forget some of them. Here's one thing that's another, just like, he's a liar. I call him a liar. Here's another example. I do. And I don't say that lightly. But among all these things, so Bill Barr releases his 4-page letter. A couple weeks later, we've still not seen the Mueller report. And Barr's testifying in front of Congress. And he's asked, has anybody on Mueller's team expressed any dissatisfaction to you with the way you've represented their report? And Bill Barr, cameras running in Congress, leans into that microphone and says, nope. Now, a couple days or weeks later, we learn that Mueller sent him that letter before then saying, hey, man, you misrepresented everything I did. And when he gets asked about that, Bill Barr says a bunch of gobbledygook. If you look at his answer, it's just like the worst witness ever, just talking in mushmouth word salad. But essentially he says, oh, well, I was asked if anybody on Mueller's team said that. I don't consider Robert Mueller to be a member of Mueller's team. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, we don't have to accept that. We can call that BS, and I do.
Well, I mean, he's not the only one who apparently lied to Congress. The former Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, also lied to Congress. And I want to get to that later on. You have a series of recommendations for what to do about this going forward. And for me, all of it comes down to accountability. If there are no consequences for blowing through these things, what the rules don't really matter. But backing up a little bit, I want to talk a few more things that stand out for me.
Yeah.
Flynn, Stone, and Lafayette Square. But let's start with Flynn. Again, you have normal attorney general that abides by his oath to uphold the law and the Constitution. You have Bill Barr. Where's the disconnect, Elie?
Yeah. So what Bill Barr did in the Michael Flynn case, and we all know the history with Flynn, he pled guilty very early on. He cooperated. We forget. He cooperated successfully for a long time with Mueller's team. Mueller's team put in letters saying he's been very productive. I mean, who knows where he was going to lead them? And then he suddenly went cold and he stopped, or he started lying to them. And I argue in the book, if you're a cooperator, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, is to stop mid-cooperation. And the only way that makes any self-interest is if you're confident you're going to get taken care of somehow or other. Enter Bill Barr. Bill Barr takes the unprecedented step of taking a case where Michael Flynn has pled guilty twice because of a weird procedural thing and said, no, I want to throw that case out, right? And that caused the prosecutors on the case to resign in protest. And he came up with this bogus reason that there was no materiality or something like that, like his lies to the FBI didn't matter, even though the FBI and Michael Flynn both admitted that they mattered, even though the judge who came in appointed a former judge to look at the case, and he said, this is as clear a case of materiality as you'll ever see. And when you look at the Flynn case, and I'm going to just lump in the Roger Stone case, where Bill Barr undercut his own prosecutor's sentencing recommendation, people say, well, what's wrong? He's the AG, he can do that. And my answer is, of course. I mean, I talk in the book about how many times I was overruled by my superiors, and when I became a boss, there were times when I disagreed with people I supervised. However, I have two problems with Bill Barr. Number one is he only cut them out. He only undercut them after, one, they had been fully approved within DOJ, including by their own U.S. attorneys. They had gotten all the necessary approvals and gone on record in court. He publicly cut their knees out. And after, coincidentally, Donald Trump had been tweeting about it, right, making clear where he stands. And two, Barr tried to feed us this BS that those decisions to interfere with Michael Flynn and Roger Stone and nobody else in this unprecedented manner had nothing to do with politics. Oh, gee. He said at one point, well, those were the cases that made their way across my desk. Again, we are allowed to say BS, and I do. I mean, I say in the book, just think about it mathematically.
Yeah, I love that. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, DOJ charges 80,000 cases a year. Imagine you took 80,000 Post-its, wrote the name of one defendant on each of them, and taped them onto a massive brick wall, and then randomly threw two darts. Oh my God, one hit Roger Stone, one hit Michael Flynn, the two guys who were very close to the president. I mean, we don't have to accept that, and I don't.
Yeah, that I had a former Deputy Attorney General, Jamie Gorelick on the show, who was Deputy AG under Clinton. She said that as well. Like, that really was the issue, the picking and choosing winners and losers. And as you indicate, there's just the cutting off at the knees, the people that worked for him, and anyone who's had a job understands that that kind of morale demolishment is really problematic. Lafayette Square, Elie, you talk about, okay, you talked a lot about your job description as prosecutor, and that the argument, which I haven't heard made before, I think it's a great argument, was that what happened at Lafayette Square blurred the line between prosecutor and police officer or something else. I think that was a stunning moment living in Washington to just watch on television. Can you explain that?
I'm sure. Yeah. In the book, I talk, Bill Barr's a military aficionado, and he's got a little bit of a fixation with this stuff. And I talk in the book about how everyone calls the attorney general. Like, if you've ever been around an AG, state or federal, they'll go General Wehle or, General Gonzalez or whoever. And I think that went to Bill Barr's head a bit because, by the way, it's not a military nomenclature. You think it is, but it actually, like, if you go back to the way olden days, I talk about this in the book, the 1400s, it just meant attorney for the state in general matters. Like, he has wide jurisdiction or something. But this was an unforgettable scene because we have these protesters in Lafayette Square Park right outside the White House. Bill Barr is at the White House that day, and he's sort of dressed like I am now, like rumpled, like, business casual. And he's standing on the White House lawn, safely behind a fence and surrounded by a phalanx of security. And he says something to the commanders, who proceed to clear out the area. And then minutes later, Donald Trump strides through and has his memorable thing where he holds up the Bible in front of the church. By the way, fact check, he does not hold that Bible up upside down. I know a lot of people think that. He actually holds it right side up. However, there's the great moment when someone says, "Is that your Bible, President Trump?" And he goes, "It's a Bible." Anyway, I digress. Bill Barr, there are people out there who claim that Bill Barr has been cleared by this recent report that came out from the Interior that said, well, the purpose of clearing Lafayette Park wasn't to clear the way for Donald Trump. It was because there was going to be construction. First of all, I'm very skeptical of this report. Let's start off with the Interior only was one of about 5 agencies that had cops there. They didn't speak with anyone in the White House. They didn't speak at anyone at the Justice Department. I've never heard of a construction project that will begin at 7 o'clock at night. Okay, call me crazy. So let's start with that. But even if you take what the IG's report says at face value, they say they directly implicate Barr. They say Barr comes out and what he says to the commander there is, are these people still going to be here when the president walks out in a few minutes? I mean, and then what do? Boom, tear gas, clear these people out. And then what happens? Trump strides to his path. And by the way, you know who walks with him? If you look over the president's right shoulder, there's Bill Barr. I mean, again, are we to believe Bill Barr just happened to be there, just happened to ask aloud, wonder aloud, the attorney general, gee, what are these folks doing here? Are they still going to be here when the president comes out? And then just walks with Trump. Oh, no, nothing nefarious. It was just because they were putting up fencing. I mean, I don't buy it. And I think this report, which a lot of people are claiming exonerates Trump, we could disagree on that, but it certainly does not exonerate Bill Barr. In fact, it implicates Bill Barr in that.
So again, to break everything down, it is not the role of the Attorney General, even though the Attorney General does oversee the FBI, to start tear gassing protesters,
right?
Sending out armed officers in that moment to protect a president in a political situation. So that was a problem. I think something that's vastly underreported, Elie, that I'm thrilled that you put in your book, is this idea of religion, is this idea of this sanctimoniousness he has. And, you may know I worked many years ago on the Whitewater investigation, and people asked me a lot about what it was like to work for Ken Starr. And there was a bit of that, frankly, as well. This idea of, I know from a religious standpoint, what the world needs. And I want to quote from your book, stunning speech that he made, where he said he blamed secularism for various, quote, social pathology, including, quote, the wreckage of the family. We are seeing record levels of depression and mental illness, dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry and alienated young males, an increase in senseless violence, and a deadly drug epidemic. And he says, in the framers' view, free government was the only suitable and sustainable for a religious people. And in fact, quote, Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. And I'll just say, and I don't know if you've been following Justice Alito, he has somebody on the United States Supreme Court who likewise holds these deeply religious views, and this idea, and you can explain this to our viewers, this idea that somehow we need to merge religion and government, and that merging's only one religion.
Yeah.
It is Christianity.
Judeo-Christian, right, exactly. That was the part that really surprised me in doing the research for this book. When you dig in, and we dug up some things that Bill Barr said and wrote in the 1990s, including the things that you just read, Kim, and it makes clear that Bill Barr is really sort of an old school culture warrior. And it's fine to be religious. I mean, by all means, be religious in your private life. But his view was that religiosity needed to be the governing law, God's law, as he put it, needs to prevail upon our government. And he blames militant secularists, that's his quote. At one point, he even blames, and I quote Bill Barr, the homosexual movement for the breakdown of our society and the family unit and that kind of thing. And he really talks about it in military terms. At one point, he says, I don't have the quote in front of me, but he says something like, what is our strategy for restoring the church to its rightful station, right? Meaning in charge of the public governmental life. And I think when people say, why was Bill Barr willing to go to such extremes, to debase himself, to lie, to tarnish his own reputation, one of the main drivers of that is that Bill Barr has these deeply held, really extremist, beyond extremist cultural beliefs that I think we lay out in the book.
Well, you, in the beginning of the book, you mentioned that you were on air on CNN when his appointment was announced. You said, "This is," and I'm paraphrasing, "this is not a bad pick." And I think a lot of people inside the Beltway thought, "Okay, we've got an institutionalist. We'll set aside the audition memo," which was shocking. But what do you think happened, Elie, between Bill Barr, AG number one, who had his issues, and Bill Barr, AG number two?
Yeah. I quoted myself on purpose because I was there that day. I happened, you know how this works, Kim. You happen to be on set when something breaks. And I said, he's a serious guy. He's respected. He understands DOJ. I think he's a good pick. And we're coming off Sessions and Whitaker here at this point. So it's not a high bar, so to speak. What changed is a great question. I think a couple things. One, the world changed. Our politics changed. 25 years passed between, when he was AG the first time, I was in high school, literally, 1991 and 92. And 25 years later, we went from the George H.W. Bush era to the Donald Trump era, where things were much more pitched, much more polarized. And in a way, a lot of the rules had been kicked down. The other thing is, I think Bill Barr recognized this is his last chance, and maybe a chance he never even expected to have. But when we talk about his legal extremism and his cultural extremism, he's 70 some years old now. I think he was 68 when he took the job. I think he realized this is my last best chance. And Donald Trump to Bill Barr was a unique vessel, a vehicle. I do not believe, and I argue in the book, that Bill Barr looked at Donald Trump as this mystical being with sort of magical powers, the way that Matt Gaetz or someone like that reveres Donald Trump. I don't think Bill Barr ever saw Donald Trump that way. I think he saw him as a willing, perhaps unwitting co-conspirator, so to speak, as somebody who was the perfect vehicle through which Barr could pursue his goal of the sort of all-powerful president and this religiously driven, even though Donald Trump's obviously not religious, but this religiously driven society. So I think Bill Barr, was willing to do more extreme things the second time around.
A few quick questions here. What do you think is going to happen to Rudy Giuliani? And where did he play into all of this? Because again, back to the Constitution, appointment and removal, he was not appointed. He was not congressionally confirmed, but he ran foreign policy. And you talk a lot about how the Ukraine quid pro quo, that which led to the first impeachment, the second impeachment, the first impeachment. I can't, there's so many impeachments. The first impeachment that should have been investigated and possibly produced some indictments.
Yeah, the Ukraine scandal is sort of the forgotten scandal of the Trump administration, crazy enough, even though he was impeached on it. And Bill Barr's role in that was really pretty devious. One, the whistleblower's complaint that went over to Adam Schiff that started this whole thing, Bill Barr came up with this ludicrous, or DOJ under Barr, this ludicrous opinion that the law, which says it shall be produced to Congress, unless it's the president, which is just something he made up and stuck in, basically. And then Bill Barr refused to even open any case at all, any criminal case whatsoever, even to take a look at this case. What's going to happen to Rudy? I think it's a coin flip whether he gets charged. It's hard to know what they have. They're trying to put together a case that he was secretly lobbying for Ukraine, similar actually to the case we just saw today unveiled against Tom Barrack, although he was very clearly lobbying for UAE, United Arab Emirates, without disclosing it. So, people ask me, like, what do you think are the chances Trump, Rudy, and Gaetz get charged, right? So my current answer is Trump, very unlikely. I don't think the Manhattan DA has what they need on him unless they flip somebody. Rudy, I think, is just about a coin flip. There's so much we don't know about what the SDNY has. I don't think they'd have done that search warrant unless they were fairly close. Gaetz, I think, is very, very likely to get charged very soon.
So we saw the indictment today. Maybe you can summarize that. But when I hear these things, it's like with the pardons that we had at the end of the administration that were so problematic. Somebody had to be on the receiving end of the lobbying efforts to lobby the president of the United States. Somebody had to be the receiving end of the pay for pardon scheme that became, at least information about that was revealed in August. So when you say, oh, he's not going to ever be unlikely prosecuted, what do you base that on, Elie? Because he had to have been a player in this stuff.
Well, there were a lot of people around Donald Trump who were profiting off him. I mean, for example, a lot of lawyers, a lot of access peddlers took a lot of money to purportedly to help get pardons. But if they're not paying Donald Trump, I don't see evidence that they did, then he can't be faulted for it. I mean, if he did it for some other illegal reason that's provable, he certainly can. With this scheme, Barrack is charged with lobbying Donald Trump on behalf of UAE without disclosing to DOJ, which you have to do, that you're lobbying for a foreign government. We don't want people. That's what a secret agent is, somebody working for a foreign government who's trying to influence what our country does when we don't know that they're working for a foreign country. Now, if Trump was in on that somehow, or if Trump was receiving money, he could be on the line. But there's actually a way of looking at this indictment. Believe me, I make no apologies for Donald Trump, but where Trump was potentially duped. I mean, what the concern is, we don't want our government dealing with people thinking they're lobbying for whoever, but they actually are lobbying for a foreign government. So, there's a lot of reasons Donald Trump has avoided accountability, some of which are just pure luck, some of which are just the difficulty of proving things, some of which maybe the number one reason is because of his enablers, because of his fixers like Bill Barr. I know that it makes people crazy. Why isn't Trump charged with things? I think DOJ has a job to do here that they're not doing. I see no evidence that Merrick Garland has any interest in looking at anything Donald Trump has done. And focusing on the Manhattan DA case, just given us what they've shown us so far, they're going to need proof, not just that there was some fraud while Donald Trump was in charge of Trump work, but that he knew about it. Did he know about it? I would bet he did. I mean, logically, he must have. But you have to be able to prove it. And if you don't have an email, you don't have a text, and you don't have a wiretap, and there's no evidence they have any of those things, you need a cooperator. And I don't mean Michael Cohen, who's just going to say he knew everything. You need a cooperator you can bank on, who can say with specificity, yes, that's a crime. We did it that way because Trump said to do it that way.
And that's the pressure on Weisselberg, presumably in part, Alan, who is the CFO of the Trump organization. So just for viewers who jumped in, we're talking about how the Trump organization, the corporation, has been indicted out of New York at the local level, state and local level. However, the DOJ hasn't done much. And again, Jamie Gorelick, former Deputy Attorney General on the show, she said that's not DOJ's job. That's really for Congress. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree. I mean, I agree it's for Congress.
Well, and I should say, just to be clarified, for January 6th. We were talking about January 6th in particular.
No, I don't agree. I think they both have jobs here. I mean, DOJ has the criminal side of it. DOJ, when Merrick Garland took office, he made a lot of big statements. We're going to follow these leads, however high they take us. They have, as far as I know, they've charged over 500 people. They haven't charged anybody other than the folks who are physically in the Capitol. I haven't seen anybody charged with planning or inciting.
Right, the people on the other side, behind the wall of government. That's really that's the part that is the black hole that I think voters need to know about. So are you critical of Garland, Elie? You're not happy with him?
I think there's good and bad. I think he's certainly been better than Barr. I think I'll give you another criticism of Garland. Why hasn't a single person been charged with sedition? And I know sedition sounds like a big word, overthrowing the government. I mean, I could put together an argument that's exactly what they were trying to do, but it also means interfering with a governmental execution of a law, such as counting the electoral ballots. That's why they were there January 6th. It even can mean forcefully taking over federal property. I mean, of course, that's what they were doing. I think Garland's trying to steer DOJ out of any politically turbulent waters. And I understand that desire, but at a certain point, you're just not doing your job. I do think Merrick Garland and Joe Biden have done a very good job of that wall of separation we talked about before between DOJ and the White House. They're clearly respecting that.
So I really worry about accountability. And you talk about the road back at the end, and your suggestions for reform explicitly reject the view of complete prosecutorial power, restore integrity and ethics to the recusal process, adopt rules limiting communication between the president and the White House, revise the special counsel regulations, etc. But my concern, Elie, is, and this is what you did for a living as a prosecutor, if there aren't consequences for violating the laws go out the window. So a lot of this stuff is, I think, internal guardrails, including the inspectors general, some of which came after Watergate, the last real abuse of power that we knew about. And so we can change the rules all we want, but if there's no tickets for speeding, if there's no indictments and prosecutions and jail time for violating these rules, who cares what the rules are? What are we going to do?
I think you've made the point perfectly there. And, I think what we see now is increasingly people are trying to be mini Trumps. They're trying to pull off the Donald Trump routine of deny everything, admit nothing, deny everything, launch counterattack. And you see it already happening from Gates, from Rudy, from basically anybody who's charged with anything or under investigation for anything. They all think, this idea of alternate facts, alternate truth. Now, ideally, it does not hold up in court, but you don't even get to court unless you have prosecutors who are willing and able to do their jobs. And that's where I think Merrick Garland needs to take a harder stand. And the next time he testifies in front of Congress, he needs to be asked. He'll demur and he'll give all the usual boilerplate about we don't discuss ongoing investigations. But have you given any serious consideration whatsoever to Donald Trump's obstruction of justice as laid out in the Mueller report? Have you given any consideration whatsoever to Donald Trump's conduct relating to Ukraine, to his involvement in January 6th? And that's the other point I want to make, by the way. I don't buy this argument at all from certain members of Congress that we don't need a commission because DOJ's on it. DOJ's on the criminal side of it, but there's so much more to this story beyond whatever might have been criminal. What was happening in the White House? Who knew what? What was being done at the Capitol Police? What were the communications? What was the security? So that broader story needs to be told, and that's beyond DOJ. That's where Congress needs to come in.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And someone just said that cancer has metastasized from stage 1 to stage 4. Are you worried that this precedent is set? It's baked? That we're going to see another hatchet man that's going to be more successful in destroying the Department of Justice in the future?
I am worried. That's big part of the reason I wrote the book. Look, I don't, I'm under no illusion. It's a book, right? It's something in Barnes and Noble. It's not going to necessarily bind what happens in the future, but I think the first step is we need a full accounting of this. And as far as I know, there's no other book. Bill Barr's book is coming out, by the way, next year. So look for my paperback whenever his drops, because I'll have a counter ready. But I don't think it's okay that we forget this stuff, or that Bill Barr or other enablers get to recast history. And I think accountability has to start with truth. And that's really what I tried to do in this book.
Well, the book is Hatchet Man. My guest is Elie Honig. I know you have an early morning hit, so thank you so much for your time with our guest in Simple Politics, Elie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for checking it out. Thank you, Kim, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, buy the book, everyone. Good night. Thanks.